Hey everyone, welcome to episode 11 of Ferocious Finance, presented by MagicGatheringStrat. As always, I am your host, Ferociousllama. Let's jump right into it today. In case you haven't heard, the allied colored fetchlands will be in Khans of Tarkir. That is the Polluted Delta, Windswept Heath, Flooded Strand, Bloodstained Mire, and Wooded Foothills, originally printed in Onslaught. And I thought immediately, hey, this is great news, because it's one of those things where Wizards has really been trying to make the game more accessible to players, and especially like the older formats, which is great. And I've also thought a lot about what happens to Modern with new fetchlands. And if we look at all the decks that are popular right now, UWR Control, it has Arid Mesa and it has Scalding Tarn, but it does not have Flooded Strand. That's going to benefit. And then, blue-red, those tempo decks with Delver and Young Pyromancer and a bunch of bird spells and a bunch of counter spells. Those decks, they have a fetch land right now in the Scalding Tarn, but now they're going to get a new fetch land. Not specifically those decks, but new decks that don't exist because the mana is really shaky in Modern. They're going to get new fetch lands, which is awesome. So we might see more allied colored decks coming out that just weren't viable. Look at decks like UWR Control and Jund. If you go turn 2, play a land, and then do like a red ritual, pyretic ritual, or whatever the other one's called, and then play a blood moon on turn 2, if they can't deal with that immediately, they pretty much lose the game. And that's kind of that's what I mean by shaky mana bases in the format. Is there aren't a lot of basic lands, and you need a lot of them to play. It's not like Legacy where you can get by with 2 land, or Vintage where sometimes you don't play any or very few. So anyway, but the big question is, okay, so basically, allied colored fetchlands are great. They're good for the game. They increase accessibility, which is great. But when do I buy mine? We make decisions by doing research first before we run off and, start spending money, because research is always less expensive than spending money, even when the research is expensive. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try and find a case that's similar to reprinted fetchlands. And the first time they were printed was in Onslaught, so that doesn't count because they were new back then. We can't look at the prices back then. In fact, the prices aren't even online for back then, that are easily available for most people. So that's kind of not going to happen. How about Zendikar fetchlands? Problem with Zendikar fetchlands are they were also a new product, so it's different. It's just different. They're a new card, didn't exist before, and every format wanted them. Legacy, Vintage, and Standard wanted them. So that's not going to work because it's a new product. If there was already a supply that was, filling the need in the older markets, then okay, we could go with that. We can't, because that just isn't how it happened. So we need something that was a reprint, that was played in older formats, that was fairly recent, because always more recent research is always better than older research. So here's what we've come up with, is we found that there are a lot of parallels between the Shocklands from Return to Ravnica and the Tarkir fetchlands. And here's why. It's because, number 1, Shocklands are reprinted. Number 2, they're played in Standard and in other formats. And those are the 2 biggest factors. So let's look into this some more. Alright. When we look at our Return to Ravnica Shocklands, this is a graph from mtgo.goldfish.com, who I have no association with, on November 28th, 2014, where the big red arrow is on the graph. That is the lowest price ever for Steam Vents. I know it looks like over on the right where Guildpact or Gatecrash was released, it looks like it was a lower price. It's actually not. It's because it was trending upward a little bit. So you can go check for yourself if you don't believe me. But November 28th, 2014 was the very lowest price for Steam Vents ever. And that was just a randomly selected Shockland. Pick any one you want. go look at it. I'm not saying it will be exactly November 28th, but it'll be around the end of November or early December 2014, assuming it was in Return to Ravnica. And basically that's how it always goes, is people start drafting the set. It starts off super duper high. Notice how it started at like $6. And if it starts at $6, unload them, because they're going to go down. And then, I've talked about this before in previous episodes, don't buy anything like the first 2 weeks a set is out. After it's been out for a few weeks, then you can kind of pick up the cards you really, really want, if they're not for investing purposes. If they're for investing purposes, I'm saying you're going to want to wait a month. And sometimes you're even going to want to wait until the cards that you're looking for, till the next set's released, and then you can get a great deal on the ones from, for example, when Gatecrash came out, you can get great deals on Return to Ravnica cards. That's why the price seems to have shot down, and that was common for most of the Return to Ravnica cards. But anyway, so we think here at Ferocious Finance that it's going to be a similar occurrence with the Shocklands from Khans of Tarkir. Now, here's the thing about it, is, are they going to settle it $3? No, they're not. And here's why. Because there's prestige associated with owning them. I mean, look at Force of Will. Okay, we've done the math on how many drafts there are for Vintage Masters, or were, and based on all of the on-demand drafts, there were something like 50 pieces of power being opened per hour, and we figured out the math that at 50 pieces of power, that's one piece of power per 117 packs. So that's roughly 5 sets of power per hour. And we can say Force of Wills, more than that are opened. Just because of the way the numbers work out. Not many more, but some more. So let's just say, to make it easy, 50 Force of Wills per hour. And there were drafts, and that was a 24-hour per day statistic at the beginning of Vintage Masters, and I'm sure it's trailed off since M15 came out, obviously. But for the first, long time, it was insane. So the supply, the reason Force of Will is $30 is not because there aren't enough for everyone to play Legacy and Vintage. It's because for a long time, it was the most expensive card online. Like a foil Force of Will, I remember it was like $250. It was the most expensive card. It was more expensive than any card available right now, even Black Lotus and Wasteland, which are the two most expensive, by the way. So it was kind of one of those things where it's just, there's prestige associated with it, and that's what I think is the thing with Force of Will. And that's what I think is the thing with the fetchlands. It's not because of a lack of supply or too much demand. It's that people buy them and hang on to them. So it essentially reduces the supply, but not really. It just kind of reduces the supply. It's a really complex phenomenon that I don't know if any of you guys remember, but it's really interesting. It's a complex phenomenon, but it can most easily be associated with, I don't know if any of you guys remember when gas prices were really, really expensive. I live in Southern California where gas prices are always expensive. But the highest they've ever been, they were like $5 a gallon for gas. Very, very expensive. And the reason that it was because people were investing in oil futures. And they were just speculating. They were just buying them to buy them, and then the companies who actually wanted to take delivery on the futures, they had to pay more because there were less available for them. They had to say, oh, well, we need more to meet our demand, and the speculators had them. So it's really just driving the price up is really all it is. It's kind of like bidding up an auction on anywhere. On eBay is the most common place that I'm sure we've all done, where we say, oh yeah, that's a good deal, so we bid, and then it gets to a price where we don't really want it anymore, but we just keep bidding because, well, it's kind of fun, and then all it does is drive the price up because we really had no intention of buying or trying to win the auction. So what does reprinting the allied colored fetchlands mean for the eternal formats like Vintage and Legacy? And I include Modern in there too because it doesn't rotate. So you know, it's eternal too, if you ask me. So what does it have to do with them regarding finance? Well, basically, now here's the thing that it's kind of an interesting viewpoint that some people that I've heard and read articles by have said things like, "Oh, this is great. It removes a barrier to entry to the market." And yeah, that is true. That is true. It does remove a barrier. However, the way markets work is that, okay, fetchlands aren't good without dual lands, right? They're pretty bad, actually. And legacy or vintage, and you use your flooded strand or your scalding tarn to fetch an island. That always sucks when it's just an island. So there are other cards dependent on these cards, and basically, what's going to happen is, fetchlands get cheap. That's a good thing. But, and they are going to get cheap, that's true. But what's going to end up happening is everything else in the format is going to go up. And it's because, okay, now when we look at this, okay, let's look at, I'm just going to say Wasteland, for example, right? It doesn't matter. Or let's say, that's a bad example, because not every deck plays Wasteland. I would say one of the most played cards in Vintage, let's say, is like, I don't know, Ancestral Recall, right? If you're playing blue, you're playing Ancestral Recall. That's a given, right? I don't think anybody would argue with that. But, so okay, Ancestral Recall. So let's say there are X amount of Ancestral Recalls, and there are X amount of supply, or Y supply, to make it easy. X supply, Y supply. I'm sorry. X supply, Y demand. And, okay, so we make fetchlands cheap. So people start saying things like, well, guy, I'm going to start playing Vintage. And this is exactly what happened with Modern Masters, by the way, guys. I mean, look at Wasteland. It shot up from like 70 tickets to 150 tickets, up 100%. And, it's dropped down a little bit, but it's still around 140 tickets. Still up around 100%. And it's because it wasn't reprinted. So what happens is they say, oh, we're going to make this more accessible for you. But all it's really doing is making other cards expensive instead of the ones they reprinted. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle of, hey, until all of them are recently available in large quantities, it's going to be expensive to get into the format. So, here's my recommendation. It's kind of a twist. And hey, pick up your fetchlands, because they will go up. That's like a given. And once they get reprinted, it's unlikely that they'll get reprinted again for a long period of time. Same reason I say you should pick up the fetchlands from Return to Ravnica block. They're not going to be reprinted for a while, probably 5 years. So, hey, buy them, hang on to them for a year. These are, of course, very long-term investing strategies, which is, I know it's a little bit different than, it's not really the standard, cycle that's affecting this sort of stuff. But the standard cycle does come into play, and but I want to kind of go bigger than just that standard cycle. Because, I know it's the most popular format, and I know most of you guys play that, and most everyone wants to invest in that because it's the cheapest to invest in. But I kind of want to talk to you guys about just like how to diversify beyond, between formats. So that's why we're talking about this today. But anyway, so here's my recommendations. Go out and buy legacy staples. Go out and buy modern staples. Go out and buy vintage staples. Now, I know the legacy and the vintage staples are very expensive. $140 a Wasteland, that's kind of expensive, and they're going to get reprinted next summer, probably in, Vintage Masters 2 or Legacy Masters or something. But hey, you never know, maybe it won't be next year, maybe it'll be the year after, and they're just going to do Modern Masters 2. But hey, Modern Masters was very, very popular, so they might do Modern Masters 2 because they can do it in paper also, which I think is something that they'd probably want to do. Because I would venture to say they make more money off the paper cards than they do off online stuff. But whatever, that's a whole other issue. So go and buy things like, don't go buy Tarmogoyfs, okay, because they're going to be in Modern Masters too. Don't buy Liliana, because I think that's the most expensive card in Modern right now, actually. Liliana of the Veil is going to be in Modern Masters too, so don't buy those either. Buy things like Vendilion Click, and don't buy things like Hercule's Recall, because that's going to be in an upcoming set, because it's very expensive. All the cards that are like at all-time highs that have been really driven up by by the vintage and vintage masters, because vintage becoming a format online, anything that's been driven up by that phenomenon, by that set, is really something that you probably want to stay a little bit away from regarding modern staples. So Vendilion Click's a good one, Cryptic Command's a good one. I'm just trying to think of some other good ones just off the top of my head. But I hope you guys get the idea. If you have any cards specifically, go ahead and leave them in the comments and say, hey, what do you think of this? And I will tell you what I think. Either me or Dan will respond to that. So anyway, that's my recommendation. Alright, so I've tried to give you guys a really short rundown on the decision-making process that we went through to kind of figure out what we think the fetchlands will, when to buy them, what they'll sell for, and what this means, like really means, like what other decisions should you make based on this information. So if you guys got it and it made sense, great. If not, here's a summary. Buy the fetchlands in Cons of Tarkir 2 to 6 weeks after they're released online. And the reason we say that is statistically, when we look at most other set, not any other set, but most other sets, 14 days after the set is released is the lowest point for the entire set. This is a special case because they are fetchlands. And when we looked back at the Ravnica Shocklands, which are, in our opinion, the most common thing to happen recently, is it took a little bit longer than that. It actually took about 6 weeks. But I don't want to tell you start looking at 6 weeks because you may have already missed the low point. So check the prices every day. Every other day if you're not super duper into your investing, but check it often, and I would start checking around 2 weeks, and you'll have bought by week 6, and if you haven't, keep checking. Investing is not like a get rich quick scheme. It's not something you could just say, hey, I'm just going to buy these and make money. It doesn't work that way. You have to really watch the market and see what's happening. And one other thing about when to buy, and here's the easiest way to tell when to buy. Where's the low point, right? Here's where the low point is. You'll see the cards trending downward. They're going to drop off very sharply at the beginning because they're very expensive when they're first released for like the first couple of days. And they drop off. And then it kind of starts to curve. It curves so it's not as steep of a drop off. And after I want to say 3 to 4 days of it not going down, even if it levels off and it may even start going up, that's when you buy. And the reason that's when you buy is because the prices online are very erratic, and it's just because of the nature of being online, the way the market moves so fast. I mean, look at any graph of like paper Magic card prices. It's kind of hilarious because it's so smooth, and it's like, oh, I can make any prediction I need with this data. It's so good. But with online stuff, it's very erratic. It bounces up and down, 50 cents a dollar a day. So it's like, God, it's a lot harder because you have to do a lot of statistical analysis before you can even start using the data. So anyway, but as it stops going, 4 days. That's the rule. 4 days. It's not a hard and fast rule, but I would say 3 to 4 days of the price not going down, that is when you buy. Because I think that's the lowest point. And that's the easiest way to tell. The next one other thing is, what price will they be? I think they'll be at $7 to $10, and it's because people want them for Legacy, people want them for Vintage, but most importantly, they're not available in Modern right now, and people will want them for Modern. So I think they're going to scale at $7 to $10, which is, it's of course higher than the Shocklands were online, but they're not going to be outrageous because it's just a rare. And it's a land, and we don't know how good they're going to be in Standard. I mean, they might be phenomenal in Standard, and they'll be $20 cards, but if you look at the trends lately, Wizards doesn't really print rares that are more expensive than, $7 to $10. I mean, yeah, they have some, but all the really expensive cards they tend to reserve for mythic, mythic rarity. So, I really don't see it land in standard going over $10. But we think they are going to be more expensive than the Shocklands, so we're guessing around $7 to $10. And we could be wrong, because we guessed Force of Will would be much lower than it is. Turns out Time Twister's cheaper than Force of Will from Vintage Masters, which is kind of a shocker to us. At least when it first happened, we were like, "God, so we kind of revised our strategies on that, and it's still just a prediction, and we could be wrong, but we think that's the price, $7 to $10. And the other thing, now, what does this mean? What does this mean? Okay, what it really means is you should take your money and get your fetchlands. I'm not saying they're not going to go up, but all the cards that are good in Legacy and Vintage and Modern, buy them. Because what's going to happen is this is reducing the barriers to those formats, especially Legacy and Vintage. Because, Polluted Deltas are $80, right? $72, $80, something like that. They're really expensive. So, how do you make it more accessible? You reprint the cards that are expensive. But what happens is there's a supply of those cards, the cards that are not the fetchlands. And there's a demand for those cards. When you reprint fetchlands, it increases the demand for the other cards because you have to have a whole deck. You can't just play all fetchlands. It doesn't work. So anyway, what ends up happening is all the prices of vintage cards and legacy cards go up. I mean, look at Wasteland, for example. Wasteland was, $70, which, hey, it's not cheap, was $70 before Vintage Master came out. Vintage Master came out and went to $150. Now it's back down to about $140. But, I mean, it's gone up 100% in price. And it seems to be holding steady. So, that's kind of the whole thing. It's expensive, and you could have made a lot of money if you bought Wastelands before Vintage Masters came out. But one thing I do want to point out is don't go investing in cards like Tarmogoyf or Liliana of the Veil, because next time there's a Modern Masters or any Master set, Liliana will be in it and Tarmogoyf will be in it, because they're the two most expensive cards in Modern, and that's the one format that Wizards is really pushing for. That's the format, the Eternal format they want people to play. That's their quote unquote fixed Vintage or fixed Legacy, however you want to look at it. But anyway, so that's my advice. Go ahead and invest in. Anyway, that's kind of the thing, though, is that's how you kind of get ahead in investing. Is you look at this and say, well, what does it mean for the overall market? Like, where can we go next? That's really the trick. All right, that's all for episode 11 of Ferocious Finance, presented by MagicGatheringStrat. I'm your host, Ferociousllama. Thank you for watching. If you like the show, go ahead and like it, share it, subscribe to our channel. You can follow me on Twitter. The link's down in the show notes. And leave me a comment if you have any questions about anything specific. So I hope you guys like the new format. What I'm doing is we're going to do less recommendations, only because weekly recommendations, there are so many cards that it really, for us here at Ferocious Finance at least, it gets really monotonous to say, oh, buy this every week, or buy that every week, and then a lot of cards we end up recommending more than once, because it's like, hey, continue doing this. If you still have them, get rid of them. If you bought them, buy more. And it's really, it's just like, for us, it feels like we're not really doing a service to everybody. So what we are going to do is I'm going to try and teach you like the theory and the why and kind of the steps we go through to make our decisions. So if you like that and you want more of that, let us know. We're still going to do recommendations, but we're going to cut them down to every other week or every month, just because too many recommendations makes the show really stale and makes it makes it not as much fun and less of a learning experience for you guys. So I can always devote more time to telling you guys about something, or how we research something, or how we solve a problem, or how we do certain things that can help you guys in your investing. So if you like the new format, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know. So thanks for watching, guys, and till next time.